What's going on, Falcon fan? This is your boy Ricondo. Come back at you with another video. So, guys, today we're going to talk about this 2026 quarterback market that's out there. It's heating up. Interesting thing about this year's market is that it's not like this big name guy that somebody like everybody is coveted to go and get. Well, it's a guy that everybody maybe going to come to get, but it's not a big name guy. So we're going to talk about that, the quarterback movement, and pretty much how does that affect the Atlanta Falcons? Because we all know the Atlanta Falcons quarterback situation right now is the fact that um, they're going to go ahead and release Kirk Cousins, start a new league year, and the only quarterback they currently have on the roster is recovering from a partial ACL. So those are the facts that we know about the team. So in essence, the Atlanta Falcons will have to go get quarterback and maybe a couple of quarterbacks to come in, to install the system that they're gonna have to start here April 7th on OTAs, going into minicamp, going to training camp. Like I said, we don't know the direct timeline for Michael Penix Jr. So when you think about that, the Atlanta Falcons have no choice but to go ahead and make the movements they need to make in order to be able to get this season on the way. All right, so that's what we're going to talk about today. We'll also give you a quick update on the Atlanta Falcons coaching staff. I haven't talked about Troy Lewis. Of course, we know he got released. We'll talk about that. And then another addition that the Atlanta Falcons actually have added to the coaching staff. They're getting close to finalizing their coaching staff, and we could, move on to something else this week. Right. All right, guys. So with that being said, let's go ahead and talk about the coaching staff real quick before we get into the quarterback talk that we're going to talk about today and the coaching staff update from this Atlanta Falcons. What's going on, James? Um, so first of all, before we get into the additions, let's get into some subtractions here for the Atlanta Falcons. Of course, we know about assistant defensive lineman LaTroy Lewis. Had a investigation going to him about rape of a young lady up in Michigan. And if you look at some of the details, it's pretty vivid details. Of course, his lawyers came out and said that he's innocent, right? So in honestly, guys, in the court of law, you are innocent until proven guilty. So you have to take that with a grain of salt, right? You just have to. It is what it is. We heard somebody say that today, but you know, but with the details, especially what just happened to James Pierce Jr. And then this comes out with one of your coaches on the coaching staff, and the accusations about rape. The Atlanta Falcons did not waste any time at all going ahead and dismissing LaTroy Lewis from his position. Like I said, he was listed as the assistant defensive line coach, up on the Nate Ali. Now the Atlanta Falcons probably have a vacant spot there that they won't have to fill. But with all the negative press the Atlanta Falcons have already had this offseason, like I said, with the James Pierce Jr. situation, which we still, don't know what's going to happen with him and the status of him moving, forward in 2026 and beyond. So, I guess Arthur Blank is like, we're not going to even sit here and try to look at this, with a guy we just hired, a couple weeks ago, and then this pops up with the rape allegations, and now you have to question sometimes the background check, because you would think, they would have did a little bit more due diligence, looking at this guy before they bring him in, and he had these accusations out there. Now, at the end of the day, he might be proven innocent, like I said, because you have to go through the judicial system and see if what's pans out for that. But if you look at some of the evidence that's out there, text messages and things like that, man, it does not look good for him. The same boat with what we were saying about James Pierce Jr. So, but at the end of the day, you have to wait to see what happens with what happened with Troy Lewis. Wish him all the best, but he's no longer employed by the Atlanta Falcons, right? All right, so let's talk about the coaching staff in the sense. So, of course, head coach Kevin Stefanski, offensive coordinator Tommy Reese, defensive coordinator Jeff Ulbrich, special team coordinator Craig Ackerman, um, coaching fellow offensive assistant Michael Bearden. He came over from the Cleveland Browns in that same um, title. Passing game coordinator, offensive side of the ball is Tanner Engstrom. New, new passing game coordinator for the Atlanta Falcons is Patrick Toney, right? Guy that came highly recommended, has a lot of experience, in his last stint. So Patrick Toney is going to be the new defensive pass coordinator, a guy that's taken over for Matt Rugenberger. We know he got hired. Mike Rugenberger got hired as the defense coordinator for the Cleveland Browns. So Patrick Toney coming in, taking his spot. Our secondary coach is Justin Hood. Our offensive line coach is Bill Callahan. We all know about him. Assistant defense assistant Dave Hustable is a somebody that's coming back to the team. Nick Jones is the assistant offensive line coach. The tight end coach is Kevin Koger, is a rollover from the last regime. Of course, Nate Ali, if our defensive line coach. Mike Petrie's been here a while as a running back coach. Our new wide receiver coach is Robert Prince. Our inside linebacker is Barry Root, who was here last year as our inside linebacker coach. Got promoted John Timu. He was actually here last year, but he got promoted. He's going to be our offensive line, outside linebacker coach. Where was I? Our quarterback coach is going to be Alex Van Pelt, who was a former offensive coordinator, assistant offensive line coach, and we got two assistant offensive line coach. Matt Jones, our assistant special team coach is Chase Blackburn. Our assistant defensive back coach is Ricky Manning. Our assistant quarterback coach is Jordan Reed. Our director player person performance is Jonathan Griffin. He's somebody from here from last year. Our assistant director strength coach is Eric Jernstrom. Our director of performance science is John Nelson. Our coordinator of performance science is Robert Torres. Assistant advisor to the head coach is Bob Quinn. He had that same role with the Cleveland Browns. Manager of coaching operations, Jacqueline Roberts, came over from the Cleveland Browns. And coordinator coaching operation is Madison McDucklet. So that's is the coaching staff. Now that Latroy Lewis is actually dismissed, you would expect them to bring in another assistant defensive line coach. And I think, guys, that would actually wrap up the coaching staff. First, looking at this coaching staff, I like the mixture. I like, keeping some of the guys that was here from last year to keep some kind of continuity, especially on defense side of the ball. Of course, bringing the new offensive minded guys in because the head coach is offensive minded, bringing in his scheme, what he wants to do. You expected a lot of more turnover on the offensive side of the ball, which that's what took place. But I love the additions of Bill Callahan, offensive line coach, and nothing away from our previous offensive line coach. He was really, really good. But Bill Callahan might even be even better with that to help improve that offensive line. The addition of the wide receiver coach Robert Prince, I like that move as well. So when you look at some of the Tanner Engstrom, a former offensive coordinator, you got Alex Van Pelt, a former offensive coordinator, to go along to help Tommy Reese with offense. I loved all those movements. So when you're looking at the coaching staff, I like that how it's been have been assembled, but at the same time, now they got to put in their work, right? And that's where it's really going to boil down to putting in the work. And from the defensive side of the ball, you hoping that that year one or year two jump within the same system. Which, if you look over the last 5 years, they have not had this, not once, keeping the same defensive system in place. So this is going to really help some of these defensive players, hopefully, be even better than it was last year. And you have to love that, especially when you're looking at the younger players that contributed a lot to the team last year. Those guys being able to have a second year in this system is going to be huge. So That's what I love about the coaching staff, and that's your update, guys. Let me know what you think. Are you pleased with it? It was not a whole bringing the Cleveland Browns, north to the Cleveland Browns south. That's not what happened. Did bring some guys over, but most of the guys he brought over from the offensive side of the ball, and you kind of expected that when you bring in an offensive minded head coach. So what's going on, Eddie? We got how you pronounce that? Levi Top. If I messed your name up, sorry about that. What's going on, James McNair? Alexander Ramprop. This dude has to be AI. Are you talking about me? No, I'm not AI. I'm that guy. Can I have a moderator? No, you got me. So let's roll. All right. Next thing, guys, we're going to talk about today is the offseason moves of the quarterback. Right. So we all know um, that it's a lot of teams that searching for um, the solution at quarterback, right? You look at the New York Jets; they're up in the air. You look at the Miami Dolphins, their situation. You look at the Arizona Cardinals, look at their situation. Indianapolis Colts, look at their situation. You look at the Pittsburgh Steelers, look at their situation. Um, Look at the Atlanta Falcons. You look at their situation, and you start to say, okay, it's a lot of teams that's in a market for a quarterback, and then you go over to the draft, right? And when you're thinking about um, the draft in itself is not quarterback friendly this year, right? Let's go back to the Desmond Ritter draft, the Kenny Pickett draft, when only one guy got drafted in the first round. That was Kenny Pickett, and the next guy got drafted was Desmond Ritter, way in the third round. You could see something similar to that this year. Of course, they got Mendoza. He's probably going number one to the Las Vegas Raiders, and then you have Ty Simpson is coming up. You know, pretty pretty quick here right now, making his way up to move up. Maybe he get drafted in the first round. We just don't know yet. But right now, that's look like the only two guys that looking like going to get drafted. The rest of the guys is going to be day two, day three picks themselves. So, and you don't know how that factor right now. It definitely could go to quarterback needy teams in day two and day three. So that's the quarterback market from a draft standpoint. But now you go to the free agency standpoint, or just teams that's looking to get off some of their quarterbacks' salaries. And so it's going to be a lot of quarterback movement in this this offseason cycle that we probably, I guess we are expecting most of this stuff to happen, but it's going to make it really interesting for our Atlanta Falcons. So you look at guys like Tua Tagovailoa. It's reported that he's probably going to get released, and they're going to designate him a post June 1 cut, so they can split that cap number over the next 2 years. And if that's the case, Tua Tagovailoa is going to be affordable contract to come in for the his next team, because a lot of that money is guaranteed. So he's going to get paid. If you go back a couple of years to see what the Denver Broncos did with the Russell Wilson trade, and Russell Wilson came in and like $4 million to the Pittsburgh Steelers. So it could be something similar to that with a Tua Tagovailoa. The same thing is talking about Kyler Murray from the Arizona Cardinals. He's another guy that's been rumored to might be released as well. And that could be the same situation. The reason why these guys been released because the teams is not going to have probably a trade partner to be able to trade these guys to, because of their cap number and the money they still owe in those contracts. So these guys, if they're not going to be with those teams, they're probably going to be released. Another guy that potentially could be released. Listening to Ian Rappaport yesterday during the combine, he talked about the quarterback out of the Raiders, and he might be released as well. So that just add to the list, right? When you talk about the list of quarterbacks that definitely could be out the door, man, you just look at it. Geno Smith definitely is one of those guys as well. So you got Geno Smith, you got Tua Tagovailoa, you got Kyler Murray. All those guys are currently on teams right now that's under contract that could potentially be released, which would make those guys candidates for some of these quarterback needy teams that I talked about earlier, right? Um, you look at on the younger side, um, Kyler Murray and Tua Tagovailoa both are younger side. Both of those guys got injury history. You know, thinking about the Falcons, worrying about Michael Penix's injury history, bringing in one of those guys would be, in the same vein of that. Justin Fields is another guy that potentially could be released as well. So you got Justin Fields, you got Kyler Murray, you got Tua Tagovailoa, you got Geno Smith, right? Those are guys that could be released from their teams and could be a spot for going to another destination, right? Those are the guys that you want to think about. Then you have the free agents that's out there, right? You have the Russell Wilsons, you have the Joe Flacco's, you have the Jimmy Garoppolo's, you have the Gardner Minshew's, right? You have um, veteran quarterbacks that potentially come in and be, the quarterback for you. So the question is, when we're talking about the Atlanta Falcons, what direction should the Atlanta Falcons go in, right? So first of all, one of the things that we do know is that the Atlanta Falcons are definitely going to bring in a quarterback. They have no choice. Without a doubt, they're going to bring in not one, but two quarterbacks. Two quarterbacks. So what route should they take when they're bringing in these two quarterbacks? So we remember 2 years ago now, right? Almost 3 years ago, when the Atlanta Falcons invested highly in the quarterback position, when they paid a one quarterback $180 million, and then they doubled down and drafted a quarterback number 8 overall, right? They invested highly in the quarterback position, right? It's a lot of money to go towards one position, and one of those guys is not going to even see the field, right? That's unless an injury, because if injury happens, the guy will see the field. But if everybody stay healthy, one of the guys is not going to see the field, and you paying all that money to that guy, and he's just going to sit, right? So that's the mindset the last regime had, right? They wanted to make sure they never have quarterback issues again, so they paid a lot of money to a guy for the now, and then they invested in the future at the same time. That's where their philosophy was. That's what they decided to do. The question is with the Atlanta Falcons, will they do something similar like that again? Or will they take a gamble and put all their eggs in a basket on Michael Penix Jr. for 2026? Right? And how you do that is go out and get what they call a bridge quarterback, right? Somebody that comes in and who's reliable enough to be a starter if you need to, right? If you need him to start the season off, or you need him to come in and play some games, but you still thinking you can still win games with this guy, do they go that route, right? And say that Michael Penix Jr. is our guy. Once he get healthy, we're going to give him the opportunity to prove himself that he is our guy, right? They do it this way, right? Because I'm thinking about the now and the future. If you do it this way, you're betting on that he's going to be the guy, and when you're doing team building, it works in your advantage doing it that way, right? Because you're not going to invest highly in a quarterback for the now and hoping, because you can do what the Indianapolis Colts did last year. They paid Daniel Jones about $14 million, $15 million, pretty much thinking he's probably going to be the starter quarterback when they had Anthony Richardson on the roster, who was the number 4 overall pick, right? So they pretty much brought in Anthony Richardson replacement. Is that what the Falcons are thinking, right? If they go down that route, that's when you will see a guy like a Kyler Murray come in, right? A guy that could potentially be your starter, and however much money you pay him, because you like he's not old in age. He still have potentially could be a starter in this league, at some point if he can stay healthy. And, he does have all the talent to be that guy. We have seen flashes from him in Arizona. So if you bring in a guy like Kyler Murray, would he be somebody that you could maybe consider to be the future of the Falcons for your quarterback? Or, like I said, you bring in a guy like, let's say, a Joe Flacco, right? And know that he's not the future. He's just the guy to come in that you got experience with, can run your offense, and once your starter gets right, he's going to get back up on the center, right? That's exactly what the Cincinnati Bengals did last year. They traded for Joe Flacco because they know that their guy will be back soon in Joe Burrow. And once Joe Burrow was cleared to come back, Joe Flacco went to the sideline because he understood he was the backup quarterback. So that's the question. That's the the $1 million question that the Atlanta Falcons definitely going to have to sit back and think about when they start to bringing in their decision to bring in these quarterbacks, right? Um, so, or do you get you could say the same thing about a guy like Russell Wilson, right? He would fit that same mold up under Joe Flacco. Jimmy Garoppolo would fit that same mold of Joe Flacco. Somebody that can start, can come in, that has experience, that has Super Bowl experience. All three of these guys I just mentioned definitely have that, right? They have had playoff runs and they have been to the Super Bowl. Russell Wilson, Jimmy Garoppolo, and Joe Flacco. No, they're not the future, but they could definitely be a insurance policy, to fill in until potentially the starting quarterback for your franchise is back and ready to go, right? So those three names is when I think about going down that road to where the Atlanta Falcons could potentially have somebody come in and be a filler for this team. Those three guys definitely fit that description of being able to be that bridge guy for Michael Penix Jr. Right now, like I said, the Atlanta Falcons decide that they want to go ahead and say Michael Penix Jr. is not the guy, you know, to lead this team further, and not going to be a franchise quarterback. Then in this case, you will have to decide and determine that you want to go younger route, right? Um, you would bring in um, a guy like a Kyler Murray, a guy like a Tua, right? These guys are still in their prime per se, right? That could potentially be the starting quarterback for years to come if it works out for them, right? Um, I don't think Justin Fields falls into that category right now because he's been here for 6 years and he has never shown flashes of being a consistent quarterback in this league. Justin Fields would definitely be a backup quarterback. He would be filling in for Michael Penix Jr. to get healthy. However, he does not have a track record of being a solid starter that you could trust that's going to win games for you. So that's why I didn't add him to that list of the three that I talked about earlier. Um, of course, then you have guys like Malik Willis of the world that a lot of people have um, high on their free agency board to potentially be off and get paid a good amount of money, on a 3 game sample size that he had with the Green Bay Packers, right? So, um, like that's impressive. 3 games and you get paid $30 million. Like I said before, I don't understand how that's the case. Guy started 6 games, 3-3, and people saying that he's going to get paid $30 million. It does not make sense to me at all. But if somebody is willing to pay Malik Willis $30 million a year off of 6 games, and then you're not willing to see what Michael Penix can do, that's just with a lot cheaper value on his contract. Just don't make sense to me. But Malik Willis is another guy that's been mentioned around. Guys that you could typically trade for that's still up on the contract as well is guys like Matt Jones. We heard Dan Orlovsky saying that the Atlanta Falcons should trade for him. Um, right? His contract is not that much. He's up under a a backup quarterback salary. So the contract would not be that much. But the question would be, what would be the asking price, and do the Atlanta Falcons want to go there? Matt Jones would be signaling that they don't believe in Michael Penix, and they're moving forward with Matt Jones if you make a trade for him. Um, Another bridge guy that they could trade for is Jacoby Brissett, another guy that has familiarity with um, Kevin Stefanski, a guy they could bring in. He could be potentially the guy that could come in and be a bridge. This is the same guy that they had success with when Deshaun Watson got there. So it is possible for um, Jacoby Brissett to come in and win football games for you. He did a decent job with the Cardinals last year when Kyler Murray went down. They didn't win a lot of games, but he played decent. Um, and he could definitely do the same at Atlanta Falcons, but with that understanding that he would be a bridge quarterback, right? So, so guys, long story short, when we talk about this offseason, these quarterback moves, it's going to be interesting to see where all these different quarterbacks end up um, on the different teams around the league, right? Like I said, you got the Pittsburgh Steelers. Are they going to run it back with Aaron Rodgers? They're going to wait on him just like they had to wait on him last year. Or are they going to go with they drafted the quarterback from Ohio State last year? They might go with him. How, right? They could definitely do that. Um, they could go back in the draft and maybe draft Ty Simpson this year. They could do that, right? The New York Jets. Where do they go, right? Um, the Minnesota Vikings. I did not mention Minnesota Vikings earlier, but they're in the same scenario where um, they don't believe in Mike McCarthy, JJ McCarthy, and they might be looking bringing some competition there, right? They don't completely believe in him, so they could definitely be bringing some competition there. A guy like Kirk Cousins could definitely go back. I did not mention Kirk Cousins with the Atlanta Falcons because we heard from the Falcons GM said they're not going to re-sign him. So I did not mention him. He could definitely potentially be a guy that the Atlanta Falcons might want to consider to bring back. As a matter of fact, he probably would be the perfect guy to come in to be that bridge for Michael Penix Jr. However, Kirk Cousins wants to be a full-time starter. His desire is not to be a backup guy. So that's probably why they're not considering bringing him back. Kirk Cousins thinks he have time, more playing time left in his career, and he wants to go somewhere to be a starting quarterback, not a backup bridge quarterback for a younger guy. So the Minnesota Vikings potentially, I don't see him wanting to go to the Jets because that definitely could be a consideration for Kirk Cousins to go to the Jets. Um, so those are some of the things that the Atlanta Falcons definitely um, need to think about. When they're thinking about the decisions they need to make this year with the quarterback. But the biggest thing that Atlanta Falcons need to do um, this offseason is about this week. that's what the Atlanta Falcons need to do. And what I mean about that is the fact that this week is really, it's probably one of the most important weeks for the Atlanta Falcons, right? It's March the 1st. The Atlanta Falcons got roughly 8 days before the legal negotiation period for the free agency starts. It starts on the 9th. It starts on the 9th of March. They can legally start negotiating contracts for free agents. Um, so this week, why I say this week is important for the Atlanta Falcons, because at this point of time, the Atlanta Falcons do not have enough cap space to be major players in the free agency, right? Ian Cunningham has said he don't want to mortgage the future, right? You got to be smart about the decisions you're making. And now, so we do know about two decisions they have made to release guys. That's Kirk Cousins is one of the guys that they're potentially talking about go ahead and release, and then the other guy is Cardell Hodge, right? Like on my last show, I mentioned that that's probably about $4 million. With those guys combined, is added cap space. Right now, I'm looking at one of the cap projections for the Atlanta Falcons. They're sitting at about $8 million, almost $9 million in cap space, which means the Atlanta Falcons have to make moves to be players in free agency. Right now, one of the biggest things that Atlanta Falcons can do, because they're up under the cap, they can make deals and then make moves after they make these deals, right? Because they're under the cap, so they within the rules, right? So, and you're looking at the cap uses for the top 51 players, right? That's what you're looking at. So since the Atlanta Falcons is under the cap, they can make moves and then make moves, to get those guys signed, right? So they can actually make agreements with guys, and then before they actually sign the guys, they can do roster movements to make sure they have money up under the cap to get those guys signed. So I still believe that Atlanta Falcons either make more cuts, right? One guy come in mind is Darnell Mooney. What they decide to do with Darnell Mooney, it's really um, is a big decision, because now if you look at the Atlanta Falcon receiver core, the only two veteran, you know, accomplished receivers they have on the roster is Drake London and Darnell Mooney. If you decide to cut and release Darnell Mooney, now the Atlanta Falcons will have a big need at the wide receiver position, coming up this offseason. So that's a really big decision for them to make. However, if they do decide to go ahead and release Darnell Mooney, that would give them about, I think, $11 million in cap saving if they designate it as a post June 1 cut. If they don't, it'll be like $6 million. So they have to make a decision what they want to do with Darnell Mooney. That's one guy to bring in mind for release and cuts. Also, the Atlanta Falcons can make restructures, right? If you go look and see what the Dallas Cowboys decided to do with Dak Prescott and their guys, they freed up about $60 million in cap space. So, and people always say, how can a team, that was up over the cap or up under the cap, that didn't have cap space, go out and sign the guys? This is how you do it. Because what you're doing, you're actually moving your money in future years, right? You still got to pay. The bill will still come due. It's never not where you're gonna not have that money on your books, but you're able to move it forward. In the Cowboys, situation, they know they got to make signings, right? Do they want to keep George Pickens? That's a question that they will have to make a decision on. If they do, it's going to be about over $30-something million in contract. Just to, like I said, with Drake London, that's the going rate for receivers. And George Pickens is going to get his money, because he could make the argument that he was the number one receiver for the Dallas Cowboys last year. But the Dallas Cowboys went on ahead and restructured those guys to make sure they had cap space available, but they could be players in the free agency, right? The Atlanta Falcons could do something similar to that, right? And they could do it without actually hurting their future because the guys that they can consider restructuring as guys is going to be here for a long time that more than likely could potentially sign another contract here in the future. So those are some of the decisions the Atlanta Falcons need to make, right? All of these decisions that they make this week and in free agency will give you an idea of what the Atlanta Falcons is potentially going to do at that quarterback position. So when you're looking at, you know, what they need to do with the most important position in sports, is the quarterback, which Atlanta Falcons at this point in time do not have a healthy quarterback on their roster. Um, this week will kind of gives you an idea of their plan, how they're planning to move forward, right? Cuts, restructures. Are they going to be big players? Free agency? Are they going to stay pat? What is their game plan, right? We all know some. If you've been watching this channel and watching other channels, talking about the Falcons, we all have an idea of the needs that the Atlanta Falcons have, you know, on this team, right? We know they need help at the cornerback position. They need help at the linebacker position. They need help at the defensive line, right? They need that. Of course, they need receiver help, right? You're potentially going to lose two key players on your roster in K. Nellis and Tyler Algier. So you would need a backup running back. You need another linebacker. You might even lose David Omniata. So these are some of the moves. The combine is finished. It finished up today, here March 1st, right? Now the Atlanta Falcons need to go ahead and focus on the free agency, which will go, you know, really hot the first week of free agency, right? Then it'll die down, and then they go back into their draft, right? That's how these things work, right? We know, like I said, that's why this week is important, especially for a new regime like the Atlanta Falcons, where they had to, assess their own roster, right? Everybody that's there is new, right? So they're assessing their own roster. They got to look at their own free agents first, then they got to go out to the free agent market. Now we heard Ian Cunningham mention um, that he's impressed with the pro scouting staff, right? So pretty much they already laid out all the potential guys that fit within the cap structure that Atlanta Falcons have, because it's nice to go out and play fantasy football and bring in all the best free agents and things like that, but they have to fit within your cap structure. And and Atlanta Falcons have a lot of things concerned to the cap that they really need to be careful about, because they still got young need to pay, right? Guys like Bijan, guys like Drake London, right? We still don't know, if they're going to make a long-term deal with Kyle Pitts. So they have, decisions they need to make, and they have to factor in, like I said, their young talent along with the free agents, along with not margins in the future for 1 year, right? That's the way they got to look at it. That's the way they got to look at it. Um, it's a lot of moving parts going. This is one of the most exciting times, um, in the NFL, especially when you get a new regime in, especially for our Atlanta Falcons, because it's a lot of unknowns, right? We got a lot of questions that need to be answered, but the good part about it is a lot of these questions going to be answered within the next 3 or 4 weeks, right? And then we probably get the last piece of that at draft, you know, draft week, right? Because you start to see the finalization of the roster. But until then, guys, it's going to be exciting. Um, Free agency is like I said, it's about to start wrapping up within about 8 days. So be on the lookout for that. But I do believe the Atlanta Falcons need to make some moves. So don't be surprised if you start getting updates about, you know, restructured releases and things like that, because that's going to play a major role into decisions that the Atlanta Falcons going to make it here in the next 9 or 10 days. So, guys, let me know what you think about this whole quarterback movement. I know a lot of people, you know, just want to. A lot of people just want a good, solid quarterback to come in and help us win games, right? That's what you guys care about, right? And I get it. But you guys have heard me sit here and rant. Um, they need to look for a franchise quarterback. That's that should be the Atlanta Falcons' goal, to find a franchise quarterback. Because when you find a franchise quarterback, you will be one of those teams that consistently win year in and year out. Right? That should be your goal, right? Um, and trying to piecemeal it in year by year is not the answer. That's what we did for all Arthur Smith tenure, right? When they decided to let Matt Ryan go, we did that. Tried to piece it in. Taylor Heineke, Desmond Ritter, Marcus Mariota, right? Um, the last regime, with Raheem Morris came in, they tried to just fix it in you know, one single swoop, right? They tried to come in and like, we're going to double down at this position. We're not going to have problems at the quarterback position no more. That's what their plan was, right? Well, obviously that did not work well for them, right? Because they're no longer here. Um, and now you're going back and looking at that decision that they made. It really backfired. Um, and it actually put the Atlanta Falcons in a quandary, this new regime, because they got to split the dead cap over the next 2 years of Kirk Cousins' contract, and now the quarterback that they did bring in to be his replacement is injured, so it didn't work out at all for that regime. Um, and this new regime needs to make sure that they try to start off on the right track, move in the right direction. I have went on record saying that I think the Atlanta Falcons need to bring in a bridge, and they need to find out if Michael Penix is the guy, right? I don't think nobody would crucify them for that. I just don't. I can't say nobody, because the fan base already giving up on Michael Penix Jr. So they like, we should go ahead and turn the page already. But I just believe that contract is on the books. You're going you're going to pay that contract anyway. If you can build a team around him and see if he's the guy, all right, that's the way they should go. And then if he's not the guy, at least you build a team around your next young quarterback that you bring in. That's the way I look at it, right? But I'm not a head coach. I'm not the general manager. I'm not the president of football. I'm just a real Falcon fan that's been here since for however long I can remember. And that's my opinion, right? Definitely want to hear from you guys. Let me know. Give me your opinions on this quarterback situation. Um, all the guys that I mentioned today, to the Jimmy Garoppolo's, to the Joe Flacco's, to the Geno Smith, to the Justin Fields, to the Kyler Murray, to the Tua Tagovailoa's, to the Mac Jones, to the Jacoby Brissett's, um, to the Malik Willis, any of those guys. Who would you rather come in and be the quarterback for the Atlanta Falcons? Either to be the new franchise quarterback or be the bridge quarterback for Michael Penix Jr. once he gets healthy. Definitely want to hear from you guys. Give me your opinion on this quandary that the Atlanta Falcons got to make decision. This is the first major decision for this regime, right? Um, the cutting the Kirk Cousins, that's easy, right? The last regime had already helped you with that because they helped you restructure his contract, right? Cardell Hodge, that wasn't, you only $2 million there. That wasn't a big deal. The quarterback decision that the Atlanta Falcons make will be their first major decision that they make, and it will let all of us know the direction that they want to go in. That's what let us know because they bring in a guy like Joe Flacco. They let us know that they want to see what they got in Michael Penix Jr. They bring in a guy like Kyler Murray or trade for a guy like Matt Jones. That lets you know that they really don't believe in Michael Penix Jr. and they want to see if these guys got what it take. So that's when you looking at it, you kind of get an idea of what they're thinking, right? And don't be surprised if the Atlanta Falcons draft a young quarterback as well. That would be smart, right? You draft a young quarterback, come in, um, to sit behind the guy. You're not bringing him in to compete. Just bringing him in to sit and learn, right? Um, so there you have it, guys. Definitely want to hear from all you Falcon fans out there. It's crunch time coming here this week. Atlanta Falcons got to make moves. Right now, they don't have money to do it, so they got to make some more moves um, to get some money, right? And we'll definitely see how that works out. This is your boy Ricondo coming back at you with another video. Peace.